The man I sat next to at seminary for 4 years lived a pretty incredible life. Peter was the former CEO of a $400 million company. He had a $1 million home in Reno, Nevada. He had a second $1 million home in Stamford, Connecticut. He had everything materially at his fingertips. He could get on a private jet at the snap of his fingers. He had everything seemingly going perfect. And then his world was rocked. The love of his life, Kathy, who he was married over 40 years, developed one of 7 forms of cancer. And for 12 agonizing years, Peter saw Kathy withering before his eyes. He took Kathy to the best doctors, the best hospitals, but his money could not slow the cancer down. And as Kathy was expiring in the last week of her life, he held Kathy in his arms and said, "My beloved, I love you with all my heart, and I want you to know that I think God is inviting me to be a priest." Kathy looked up to him and said, "Peter, there is nothing more on earth I would rather see you do." And so after Kathy went home to the Lord, Peter decided to leave everything and follow Jesus. He took very seriously what the Lord spoke to us in today's gospel. Any one of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. He sold his $1 million home in Reno. He sold his second home in Stamford, Connecticut. He moved into a little tiny shoebox of a room at seminary. And he said, "I've never had so much joy in my life." You see, when he was making a 7-figure income, he had to come to a crossroads because his marriage early on was getting wrecked. He was spending 60 hours, 70 hours, sometimes 80 hours trying to utterly crush the competition, to be the best, to make a name for himself. But his son hardly saw him, and his wife felt terribly abandoned. He read this gospel, "Any one of you who does not renounce his possessions cannot be my disciple." He started to realize he loved his work more than his wife and his son. And so he told the company, "I'm going to continue on, but I'm going to make some radical changes. Because work is not going to be my God. I am not going to commit suicide in my marriage for the sake of fame." Peter understood detachment. And that is a spiritual word and principle for us all to internalize this evening: detachment. Is there anything created in my life and in your life that is getting in the way of your and my relationship with Almighty God? Because, as St. John of the Cross said, the smallest string can hold a bird down to earth from soaring. Think about that. A bird is supposed to soar in the heavens, but if a string is attached to the leg of that bird, it can never fly. Peter knew he had to make radical changes. He had to become detached from letting something other than God be his God. The Franciscans practice radical poverty. They take this passage so literally. They own nothing. They call nothing their own possession. Everything in community belongs to the community, and they own nothing. They have left everything materially to follow Jesus Christ. You and I are probably not called to radical poverty, to becoming a hermit in a cave, or joining a cloistered community. But every single one of us has to examine deep in our heart, is there any person leading me away from God? Is there anything that I am doing on the internet that is leading me away from God? Is possessions, just hoarding them and accumulating leading me away from God? Nothing is worthy of taking God's precious place in your life. You see, when you have Jesus, you have everything. You have the love of your life. You have what fills and completes your soul. You have the goal and reason of your existence. And when you put things that are less than God in place of God, guess what happens? Frustration. We know deep in our hearts that our hearts will be forever restless until they rest in God. And when we fill our hearts with cheap substitutes, we become frustrated, agitated, perplexed, and annoyed.